Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another interview. This time we're going to be talking about a substance that pollutes our food, water, and environment. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which are also known as PFAS. We're talking with Lauren Olson. She's the Zero Waste Manager at World Centric. They make compostable tableware for restaurants in the home. The Roanoke Park, California-based maker of that packaging is calling for new regulations on PFAS. Now, the House of Representatives recently passed Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell's bill to regulate and require labels on products and packaging that contain PFAS, which are also known as forever chemicals because they don't break down for decades or even centuries in landfills, compost piles, or the environment. PFAS has been associated with immune system disorders, high blood pressure, liver disease, kidney and testicular cancer, as well as other conditions. And Dingell, the Michigan Congresswoman, is contemplating legislation that would completely ban PFAS. World Centric is ready to support that bill. Now, World Centric released Leaf Plus. It's a compostable PFAS-free line of fiber tableware, and it's a product category that's frequently contaminated by PFAS. So they have a dog in this hunt, I just want to point out. But to be frank, Earth911 supports the idea of banning PFAS as well, and we want to share why with our listeners. So you can check out World Centric at www.worldcentric.com, all one word, no space or dash. And welcome back to the show, Lauren. We talked to you several times in the past. It's good to have you back. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Well, let's dive in on PFAS. Why is World Centric focused on this issue?
Well, I think PFAS was, and always will be a very interesting chemical in that it's so, it works so well at what it's supposed to do in terms of moisture and oil resistance, which is why it's used in a whole different slew of products with different chemical groups, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so I think when this issue first came about, it was very confusing because the legacy PFAS that you talked to earlier in terms of their medical effects, those are very well known. But the particular groups of chemicals that are used in compostable food serviceware are more unknown in terms of their long-term effects. And are supposed to be more benign than the legacy chemicals in terms of possible effects they could have on the environment and humans. So it's a bit confusing because the PFAS classification is just so broad. Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned here, and it could be 9,000 chemicals. I've heard anywhere from 5,000 to 12,000 different particular chemical structures would fall into this PFAS class, if we could even call it a class. And so it's a bit hard to parse out the actual issue. Well,
but you're making an important point. It's also like our plastic problem. We have so many different kinds of plastic, and we have so many different PFAS. I have a problem pronouncing acronyms, so I won't say PFAS. That it's hard to even comprehend as a consumer what you need to be concerned about, when you need to be concerned, and how to act on that information. So how prevalent is the use of PFAS in disposable tableware generally?
Well, in compostable and disposable food serviceware, I would say that it's used primarily in the molded fiber category, and there it's intentionally added to the molded fiber slurry before it is pressed into its final form. And then I will say, just because I know from my previous work working in toxics and consumer products, it also can be used in food wraps. For example, a sandwich wrap you might get from a quick service or fast food sort of restaurant that might contain PFAS. Also fast food in which you need to hold a French fry container, things like that that need to have extreme oil resistance might also contain PFAS.
So are there any requirements that kind of product be labeled to say that they include the material, or is it uh, or is the requirement that a food service setting, a quick service restaurant, needs to disclose that they use products that contain PFAS?
So the particular PFAS that is used in food service ware is FDA approved and safe for food contact, according to the FDA. So there is no labeling requirement. Okay. So everyday consumer will not know what contains it. It's a little bit easier when you look at other consumer products, which contain a different type of chemical in the PFAS class. Mm-hmm. So that would be, for example, your waterproof rain jackets. When it says durable water resistance, that means that PFAS has been sprayed on as a coating onto that product.
So the fiber has absorbed the PFAS.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And another thing you might look for is nonstick for any sort of bakeware or cookingware. And that means that PFAS is being used as that nonstick coating. Other things you can look for in consumer products is like for makeup, for example, like anything that's waterproof. For example, mascara for women, any sort of waterproof advertisement or long lasting would mean that PFAS could possibly be added. So those are the key things to kind of look for is like, waterproof, nonstick, might mean that there is PFAS being used in that product. And there's no requirement that they label that. But there are different companies coming out with, for example, I have a PFAS-free ski jacket, for example, made by a Swedish company, and other companies are coming out with these different alternatives. And I must admit that ski jacket does not work as well as the durable water resistance coating, but it's a step closer towards better chemistry.
Well, and that's the challenge for everyone is that we're making trade-offs. You seem to think that jacket's okay though, and we have to make a decision each day about whether or not we're going to bring these chemicals into our lives. And I'm just stunned by the idea of putting something like that close to a wet surface on your body, like wearing mascara. That is really...
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's, makeup can be pretty scary. There's, reports of even like red coloring requiring lead. And I don't think it's like so much prevalent anymore. I think a lot of the companies have really gone the further, but in the 80s or 90s, possibly lead being in lipstick, and lipstick is very easy to eat. So there's a long history in terms of women's cosmetics not being regulated enough, but there's great new movement within cosmetics for like clean and all of that. So.
And of course, we also know that there have been some influencers selling some knockoff stuff that does have those kinds of really toxic issues. Why is this issue taken 40 years to reach this moment when we're talking about regulation, when it was recognized as a health threat in the 1970s?
Well, I think there was a couple issues. And I think there are certainly other people who know a lot more about this, but I was there too, in terms of when PFAS really became something big in the last 5 years here. And I think part of it was testing, and the inability to test water down to the parts per trillion level needed in order to understand if there was PFAS contamination. And another thing was just the unknown. There was these, tales of white foam billowing up on, for example, in Oscoda, Michigan, on a lake, and no one knew why. And it turns out that it had so much PFAS from the firefighting foam contamination from the nearby military base that was causing this. And just people could not figure out what was happening. And another part was the ability to test for PFAS down to that level. And so that's another thing too, is that the majority of the PFAS news has really been focused towards these legacy PFAS chemicals, which are usually from firefighting foam, either from a direct incident that happened or military bases, which are required to test firefighting foam every year. Although there's many bills now in some states that have required that they use non-fluorinated firefighting foam for these annual practices, rather than contaminate the groundwater for life, just practicing using firefighting foam. And another thing is that they're also from manufacturing. So you look also, I know Michigan very well because I'm from there and did toxics work there. And, we had Wolverine Worldwide, the creator of Hush Puppies, using PFAS for decades. That was how Hush Puppies were able to be withstand the rain and still be swayed. That was the whole secret sauce, the key ingredient for that shoemaker. And, they were not properly disposing of the PFAS for decades, like illegally sort of dumping it in 55-gallon barrels in sort of a forest. And then there was other water discharge issues. And so we're hearing now about these sort of things coming to light. And I think it was just the unknown and the inability to test.
Well, and so what you're describing is the long-standing use is now being understood because we can see the impacts after a period of time. And boy, you just hit the nail on the head for me. I live just off a major military base that does firefighting training. I know for a fact, and we get water from the aquifer that resides under the base in my community. So I have to go back and ask my water district about that kind of contamination now. But how can the United States, of all the places in the world that has established regulatory guidelines that lead in many cases, allow us to introduce these new chemicals without having some form of testing to prevent the accidental, because I don't think people intentionally do that, or at least they shouldn't, introduction of a toxin into our lives. And as you're looking at making the next generation of tableware, I'm sure you're looking to avoid PFAS, but on the other hand, some of your competitors are not. How do they get away with that?
Well, our toxic chemical regulation in the United States is maybe not as advanced as Europe. Europe has EU REACH. We have TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, which was just renewed in 2016. And there's a huge backlog of chemicals that need to be analyzed. And the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, does that. And, under Trump, they were probably underfunded. And, we really need to put an emphasis on this in terms of a society because it's something that needs to be done at a national level. Because now we're seeing these states create, their own chemical legislation, which is great, but it would be more wonderful if, as a country, we took it seriously.
So let's talk about Representative Dingell's bill, which required the EPA to regulate PFAS. It was passed in the House with 23 Republicans joining the Democrats. Do you expect it to pass the Senate? And if it does it provide funding to enforce this kind of regulation?
I'm not as much as a policy wonk as I would like to be. I just don't have the time or the energy to really focus on it and learn more about how I think each senator would vote and things like that. So it's hard to say, but I think you did bring up a good point, is that Republicans are concerned about this too. And it's because there is legacy PFAS chemical contamination in areas in which Republicans represent. For example, the Michigan examples I brought up earlier, both of those are in what would be considered Republican areas, Republican representation of the state. And those particular congresspeople have been very outspoken about the effect of PFAS contamination on their communities, because it's multifold. It's about protecting the people, protecting their property values. And also for Oscoda, which is in northern Michigan, it's about protecting their legacy as a tourism destination. and having people come up there to like fish and hunt. And no one wants to say, hey, you can't eat these deer because they might have been drinking that water. That's not really a good slogan to have tourism up there for hunting season.
Visit our toxic wildlife. Okay, so far-right conservatives have characterized this current bill as a de facto ban and claim that it's onerous regulation because it's impossible for companies to report on more than 9,000 PFAS. Okay. World Centric takes a completely different approach to its relationship with society. You're a B corporation. You do really work to make 100% compostable products. You're avoiding this material, and you give 25% of your profit to various charities every year. From the perspective of a company that has made that kind of social commitment, what's your response to people who say it's just too much work to try to prevent this kind of toxin from being introduced into our lives through the products we use?
I would say that, regulation, that's its job, is to push the industry forward. And so if something were to come forward, I think that it would be great because then everyone would have to follow it. And in some ways, the compostable industry in particular is moving already away from PFAS because our certifier, Biodegradable Products Institute, will now only certify compostable food serviceware that has less than 100 parts per million fluorine, total fluorine. And that means that it can't be intentionally added, because if it was intentionally added, it would be over 1,000 parts per million in the product. So that would be, contamination probably just in the machinery in terms of what you would have left. And that also, that 100 parts per million total fluorine represents this issue that we have with PFAS, is that there's so many distinct chemical groups, and a lot of them are proprietary, that we don't have a way to do, for example, mass spec and be able to match one for one this particular chemical structure. We found it in there, except for the legacy PFAS like PFOA, PFOS. It's very difficult to test. And so that's why we do total fluorine, which represents the number of fluorine atoms found at parts per million, which is a proxy for looking for PFAS, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances. So we have this sort of technological lag in that we're not able to adequately figure out what type of PFAS is in consumer products. But, there are some people moving forward on that in terms of finding better ways in order to do some sort of testing. That way we can better understand what PFAS are in water, for example, or in consumer products.
So you have the new No Tree bowl, and it's guaranteed to be PFAS free. How does the shift from traditionally grown forest products to bamboo, which you use in that material, impact the potential use of PFAS? I mean, is it endemic in the forestry industry when they process the fiber that PFAS just gets injected from the machineries you're talking about? Does bamboo offer a cleaner source and a cleaner process for production?
Well, PFAS is not found in our paper products or in most paper products like that. So you have to think about what's providing the moisture and oil resistance.
Okay.
So if there isn't anything, like it's a sandwich wrapper and it looks just like a sheet of maybe plastic, shiny paper, but mostly it just looks like paper, you have to be like, what is providing the moisture and oil resistance here? And that's where it might be PFAS. And so if you look at a molded fiber object, for example, it just looks like fiber, but you're like, somehow this is able to have moisture and oil resistance. How is that happening? That's where PFAS might have been intentionally added. For the No Tree or any sort of coffee cup or things like that, there's a PLA or a bioplastic, or if you're buying a traditional product, there's going to be a polyethylene or polyurethane sort of liner. And that's what's providing that moisture resistance.
Right.
So it's not required to add PFAS to our No Tree products or utilize any sort of PFAS on them.
Do any of those liners make the compostability characteristics different? Do you have to go to industrial composting versus, say, home composting if you're an active composter?
Yeah, all of our products are made to be industrial composted or commercially composted. Okay. And that is because that's what our certification is for, first off. And then also bioplastic does require a higher temperature for where the microbes to exist that eat the bioplastic and convert that to carbon dioxide.
So if I'm out getting some food, how do I find a no-tree bowl? Do you provide any kind of signage, stickers, or otherwise that a fast food restaurant can display so that people can confidently take that oil or water-resistant material home and know they're not getting PFAS?
Well, one thing you can look for is to see if it's BPI, which is Biodegradable Products Institute certified. Mm-hmm. And that means that it meets that threshold of under 100 parts per million PFAS. The other thing is to look for products that have some sort of liner or lining, because that means that they're not relying on a chemical within the paper or fiber slurry to provide that resistance.
So this is just a practical observation. When I'm standing there at let's say, Chipotle, I don't know whether you sell your stuff to Chipotle or not. The person behind the counter really doesn't know any of this, and I have no way to ask. Is there a way that they could be trained to respond to those kinds of questions? Do you all think about investing in doing fast food worker education about the safety of the materials they're using?
Yeah, certainly. We don't sell to Chipotle, but, I provide training to different quick service or fast food sort of restaurants and educate them about these sort of issues.
Well, Lauren, I'm going to thank you for taking time to talk to us today. Tell us where listeners can find out more about World Centric.
Yeah, you can go to our website, worldcentric.com. We also have a long-form blog called The Dirt, which has in-depth stories about environmental and social issues. And that's linked on our website, worldcentric.com, or you can go to it directly at worldcentric.net.
Lauren Olson, thank you for joining us today on sustainability in your area.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Lauren Olson, who is the Zero Waste Manager at World Centric in Roanoke Park, California. Folks, please take a moment and share this podcast with your friends. Tell them about PFAS and the concern they should have about finding it in their food product and even in their clothing. If we share more ideas, we're going to create less waste and we're going to create a cleaner, greener world. We're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. Take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.